Hello everyone and welcome to another interesting game from the 22nd European Team Championship. It's big ol' Chucky versus Lenič, Slovenian Grandmaster, and like I said, we will cover a few of Chucky's games during this championship, as we haven't covered any of his games, well, in quite some time. So this is one of the games. It's Ukraine versus Slovenia, and Chucky has the white pieces. He opens with e4. With e5 by Lenič, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez defense is on the board. The Ruy Lopez is on the board, and now comes knight to f6, the Berlin defense. We have castles and knight captures on e4. The Rio Gambit is accepted here. We have rook to e1, attacking the knight, and the knight back to d6. Knight captures on e5, recapturing the pawn, bishop to e7, and now the most popular move, bishop back to f1, tucking it in for later. Knight captures, we have rook captures, and castles. This is the only move anyone ever plays here. Now the bishop can come to f6, which will make room for the other pieces, and you will kick away the rook from such a nice square. We have d4 by white and bishop to f6, rook back to e1, and now rook to e8. Trying to force white to move the rook even more than white already did. Bishop to f4, developing with ideas of capturing here, ruining black's pawn structure, but rook captures on e1, queen captures on e1, and now knight to e8. There is a possibility of capturing on d4, but then, like we mentioned, just bishop captures, pawn captures, and knight to c3, and you are up a pawn, but you have neglected your development, and you have doubled the d-pawn, and both of these pawns are just in the way of your development, so not something you want to do. It has been tried, but in every game I found in the database that black went for this, white won the game. So here, knight to e8 instead. This is the main move. We have knight to c3, and here bishop captures on d4. So grabbing a pawn, and knight to d5. This has all been played before. The pawn sacrifice is known. So the c7 pawn is under attack. We have d6 blocking the bishop, and now bishop to g5, attacking the queen. And now f6. This is one of those positions where it's okay to play f6, and bishop back to e3, offering a trade of bishops. And here Lenič grabs another pawn. Bishop captures on b2, and this has all been played before. We have rook to b1 by Chucky, and now this position has been reached before. c6 is a very important move that black should play here, but Lenič tried something different. Bishop to a3 is also a possibility, but he played bishop to e5, which is quite interesting. That's why I said it's an interesting game, because of course you'll see what white plays here. It's not a mystery or anything. If you don't, you can even feel free to pause the video. Maybe you just missed it. Well, I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on trapping the bishop on e5, and for those of you that just want to enjoy the show, it's f4. So the bishop is trapped, the bishop has nowhere to go. That's why this variation has never been tried, but I don't think this is a blunder. Here, black gives up the bishop for 2 pawns, and he has a massive center, which is what happened here in the game. We have c6, attacking the knight, kicking away from d5, knight to b4, and you still don't have any good squares for your bishop, and you don't have any ways of creating some space for your bishop with tempo, so you just have to give it up. A bishop to f5 is played, and here Chucky accepts the bishop on e5 with f captures on e5 and f captures on e5. So here black is up 2 pawns, Chucky's up a bishop, and it's gonna be, well, it's gonna be very interesting if black is able to start pushing those central pawns. We have rook to d1 by Chucky, and now you do want to start pushing d5, but if you do it too early, then your e5 pawn comes under attack. Queen g3, and once you defend it, then comes knight to d3, you attack it again, and it's well, you can push it to e4, but you don't want to push e4, you want to push d4. Here after e4, it's just going to be very hard for white to play. You have a for black to play. You have a light square bishop. All of your pawns are on light squares, and you're already down a piece. You don't want to be you don't want to have a bishop for a pawn, so white would just be very, very strong here. Bishop to d4 is coming, and it will be very hard for black to play this. So after rook to d1, we have queen to e7 first. Now the e5 pawn is nicely guarded. Maybe d5 can be played, and also the rook can now enter the game. But now Chucky no longer allows it. We have c4, preventing d5. And now comes knight to f6, bringing the knight into the game. We have h3, taking away the g4 square from black's pieces, and now queen to e6, going after the c4 pawn. Chucky brings the queen into the game while also defending the c4 pawn. Queen to h4 guards c4 and bishop to g6. g4 is a possibility at some point, so you don't want your bishop on f5 giving the pawn any tempi. With bishop to e2. Now, the bishop is very nice on e2. It controls this diagonal and also guards the c4 pawn, so if the queen has to move, it's not a problem. Knight to e4 by black, and here we have rook to c1. The queen no longer guards the c4 pawn now that Lenič played knight to e4, so rook to c1. Chucky shifts the rook over to the c file to defend his pawn, and queen to f6, now offering a queen trade. And here Chucky declines it, he goes back with the queen, queen to e1, and now queen again to e6. And here we have a4 by Chucky. a6, black doesn't want the a7 pawn to remain a target. You don't really have a good way of developing your rook as long as this pawn is on a7, so a6 and a5. Chucky grabs more space on the queen side, and king to h8. White still has a light square bishop, so you constantly have to keep an eye on for ideas like c5, bishop to c4, maybe winning the queen. Okay, d5 is a possibility now, but once you play king h8, you no longer have to worry about such things. With knight to d3 by Chucky. And now comes rook to f8, finally developing this rook, bringing it into the game, and knight to f2. Chucky is up material, so as the general chess principle says, when you're up in material, you should trade down. Knight to g3, of course black declines this, and bishop to g4 now, grabbing more space with the bishop, pushing the queen back, queen to e7, and now king to h2, kicking the knight back with the king, knight to f5, and here Chucky trades with bishop captures, and now rook back to d1. The rook is no longer needed to guard the c4 pawn, so now you again prevent black from pushing d5. The pawn and rook do a nice job of preventing the d5 thrust. With h6 by black, and now bishop back to c1. This bishop is now gonna go to this diagonal. It's going to be a very powerful piece here, and also you clear the e file for your queen. With rook to f6 now guarding this d6 pawn, because it's not if this knight gets to an interesting square, for example to e4, that d6 pawn is gonna be under attack, and then you're gonna have to give up your light square bishop, and then it's just clear advantage for white. So here bishop to b2, and now c5. It's an ugly move, but if you have to play it, you have to play it. Now you're stuck for the rest of the game with the weak backwards d6 pawn. But you know, if you don't have anything better, then you have to play a move like that. With rook to d2, a useful move as black has a light square bishop, so you don't want your rook on a light square. Also, it does a nice job of guarding the second rank, as this bishop might find its way over to c6, going after the g2 pawn, and if the rook, sorry, that's not a move. For example, if the bishop comes here, the rook comes to g6, you might have some pressure against the g2 pawn, so the rook will do a nice job keeping an eye on the g2 pawn when the knight moves. Queen to f7 by black, now again attacking the c4 pawn, and we have queen to e2, again Chucky defends it. King back to g8, and now bishop to c3. Just improving the position before making any rash decisions. We have rook to g6, and now finally knight to e4. So the d6 pawn is under attack, and if black doesn't want to give up the light square bishop, you have to defend it. So queen to e7. Now, okay, both the rook and the queen are guarding it, and now queen to f3. So how does white break through here, or can white break through here at all? Bishop to d7, the bishop is now going over to this diagonal, which we already mentioned, and queen to h5. You want to unpin as soon as possible, while also it comes with an attack on the rook. King to h7, defending the rook, and now rook to f2. Bringing the rook into the attack as well, and now bishop to c6, assuming this beautiful diagonal. The knight also is under attack, so knight to g3. The rook no longer is eyeing the g2 pawn. With queen to e6, now again going for the c4 pawn. If black can get rid of the c4 pawn, then it will be black will be who will have advantage. If, for example, if this pawn was here on d4 instead of on d6, then black would have a definite compensation for the piece. But here, while it's a backwards weak pawn on d6, not so much. Queen to h4, again, Chucky has to go back, he wants to guard the c4 pawn, and now queen back to e8. And here, Chucky decides for knight to f1, of course, a move with the knight back. The knight can now, for example, go to e3 from e3. You can go either to d5 or to g4 or to f5. You want to make your knight as active as possible. Rook back to e6 by Lenič, and now knight to e3. We have queen to g6, and here comes bishop to d2. So the bishop here isn't doing all that much. Black made sure of this, so you have to shift it over to some other diagonal. For example, this one, bishop to d2. Now it's attacking the h6 pawn. The queen also is attacking the h6 pawn. And if the knight, for example, comes to g4, the knight will also be attacking the h6 pawn. Maybe something can be done about that. Queen to e4 by Lenič, now pressuring the g2 pawn, but like we said, it's not a problem. The rook does a wonderful job controlling everything on the second rank. Knight to g4, now with a triple attack on the h6 pawn. Also, you avoid the queen trade with knight to g4, and now queen back to g6, bringing another defender to the h6 pawn. And here we have bishop to e3, just a waiting move, seeing what black will do. Maybe does black have any plans or something, but it's very hard for black to find a plan. You don't have any breakthroughs. You don't you cannot push this, you can't push this. White will just capture, create a passed pawn. You can never push this, then all of your pawns become weak. It's just a very hard position to play for black. So here black played bishop to e4, maybe with ideas of bishop to f5 or maybe even bishop to d3 to go after the c4 pawn from behind, but it doesn't work. And I'm sure you know why, but if you don't, feel free to pause the video and figure it out while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on such a nice move with the bishop. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop captures on h6. Now, of course, Lenič captured it. If you don't capture it, then you're just you just lost another pawn and you're already done material. Not something you want to do, but just in case, we will show what happens. For example, black is threatening some nasty discoveries here, so you can go back. Bishop to g5 now, and well, you still don't have a useful move for black. You can play something, rook e8, and then white can even give up a piece with knight to f6 check. G captures, rook captures on f6, and you're just gonna gobble up this pawn. All of these pawns will soon fall. For example, you can try and trade queens, queen h7, but then bishop to h6. You don't allow it, you control too much space. Rook to d8, you can try this, guarding the d6 pawn, but then just rook to e6. You open up an attack here, and you can no longer guard the d6 pawn, and once this pawn falls, then all of these pawns will fall, because if you move away from the back rank, you're getting mated. Rook e8 check, king f7, rook f8 check, king e6, and queen to f6 will be mate. So this is one such thing that can happen if you don't accept the bishop, but Lenič captured it with g captures on h6, and then Chucky just played rook to f6, and it was in this position that Luka Lenič resigned the game, and yet another victory for Vasily Ivanchuk in round 2 of the 22nd European Team Championship. He resigned because well, your queen is under attack. If you move the queen, you lose the h6 pawn. Also, your rook is under attack, so you have to capture the rook. Problem is, after you capture it, knight captures with check, and you lose the bishop as well. So after king to g7, knight captures bishop, and the white is up a clean piece. And yes, you could argue that you have 2 pawns for the piece, but you don't have any counterplay with those pawns. You cannot push the b pawn, you cannot push the d pawn, and you don't have a good move here. So it's just white who chooses what to play, how to win, and it's just too easy of a position for white to play. Of course, Lenič knows this, and after rook to f6, he resigns the game. So a great victory for Chucky in round 2, and he also, since already 4 rounds have been played, but he drew against Mamedyarov in round 3, and he drew against Levon Aronian in round 4. I thought about showing those games, but in the end I didn't. But just so you know, Chucky is doing very well in the European Team Championship. I don't know, Ukraine won all of their 3 matches. I don't know how the match against Armenia went, but as it's still being played while I'm recording this, but I will make another video from round 4, and then we're going to check out the standings finally. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Michael Bogart and Robert Kiefer for their contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing with the coverage of the European Team Championship, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and yes, I am still preparing our next big saga. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.